Life rarely warns you before it takes something away. Sometimes it gives you everything first, just so the loss hurts deeper. He had built an empire with his own hands, rising from nothing into a name that commanded respect across boardrooms and headlines. People shook his hand with admiration, praised his intelligence, and envied his lifestyle, yet none of them noticed how tired his eyes had become. Every morning he woke up surrounded by glass, steel, and silence, staring at a city that belonged to him but no longer felt like home. Success had given him control over money, but slowly taken control over his soul, replacing warmth with schedules and conversations with transactions. His days were filled with meetings and applause, but his nights were heavy. The penthouse lights reflected off the windows like distant stars he could never reach. He often stood there, watching people far below, wondering how many of them were truly happy and how many were simply pretending, just like him. Friends came only when invited by benefits, laughter echoed only when cameras were near, and every relationship felt rented rather than earned. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped being seen as a man and started being treated as a wallet with a heartbeat. One cold evening, while his car waited at a red light, his eyes landed on a figure standing near the corner. The man looked worn by life but not broken. Rain soaked his jacket, his shoes barely held together, and in his hands was a sign that read, "Kindness still matters." There was no begging, no desperation, just quiet hope. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something cracked inside the billionaire. That look followed him home, haunted his dinner, and stared back at him from the mirror. He asked himself a question that terrified him more than any financial risk he had ever taken: if I lost all of this, would anyone still care whether I lived or died? The decision came silently, without drama or announcement. He left his watch on the table, his phone untouched, and walked out of his own life. The first hours felt unreal, like a game he could quit anytime, but reality does not play along with privilege. Hunger came faster than expected. People avoided him as if poverty were contagious. He was pushed aside, ignored, judged without a word spoken. The city he once owned no longer recognized him. Each rejection stripped another layer of his identity, until he was no longer a powerful man pretending to be poor, he was simply invisible. Days turned into nights, and pride slowly dissolved into survival. Cold concrete replaced silk sheets, noise replaced comfort, and loneliness became physical. He learned that being poor wasn't just about lacking money, it was about being denied dignity. People spoke around him, never to him. Children were pulled away, security guards watched him closely, and strangers assumed the worst without knowing anything at all. The world had reduced him to an inconvenience. One night, exhausted and sick, he collapsed near an alley. That was when another man sat beside him. No questions. No judgment. Just a shared piece of bread and a quiet presence. The man's voice was calm, carrying the weight of loss without bitterness. He spoke about losing his family, his job, and his health, about nights when hope was the only thing he owned. He said pain teaches you who you really are when no one is watching. That conversation changed something fundamental. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt seen not for what he had, but for who he was. They stayed together, surviving the streets side by side. They shared food, silence, stories, and laughter that came unexpectedly and felt honest. Trust grew slowly, built not on promises but on presence. When illness struck again and the former billionaire's condition worsened, it was the poor man who ran through the night to get help, selling his only jacket to pay for medicine. He stayed awake beside him, whispering encouragement, unaware of the truth hidden beneath the worn clothes. When the truth finally surfaced, it came like a storm. Cameras, headlines, shock, disbelief. The city that once ignored him now demanded explanations. But the billionaire did not speak of experiments or lessons. He spoke of humanity. He spoke of a man who had nothing yet gave everything. He admitted that wealth had blinded him, and poverty had opened his eyes. In front of the world, he didn't offer charity as spectacle, he offered respect, opportunity, and dignity. Yet the most important moment came later, when the cameras were gone. He returned to the same streets, sat beside another stranger, and shared a meal without names or recognition. Because the real transformation was not about changing others, it was about changing himself. Life had taught him a truth no amount of money ever could: the richest hearts are often found in the poorest hands, and the true measure of a person is not what they own, but what they are willing to give when no one expects anything in return.